This is the first of a series of 13 cassettes, which, taken together, comprise an outline course in esoteric science. The first cassette is explanatory and deals with the subject from the point of view of someone who is wanting to discover what the science is all about. The other cassettes put the subject against a background of the questions that some of the deeper problems of life pose. These questions, as we shall see, are both intimate and universal. They concern each of us personally, but at the same time they are about life in its broadest terms, as it applies to all living creatures and their total environment. Although we will be using ordinary English as far as possible, the science does have a terminology of its own. A knowledge of this is advantageous in that some words have an omnibus meaning, and when we are familiar with it, it makes our writing and reading, even our thinking and talking about the subject, much less tedious than it would be if we had to express ourselves at length. For example, words like unity and law, which conjure up in the mind of the older student a whole complex of ideas which the uninstructed couldn't possibly appreciate. Most of the important basic ideas and some of the terms will be explained on the second side of this cassette. Other terms will be explained as they are used. Broadly speaking, esoteric science covers the whole field of human knowledge, but more essentially those aspects of it which deal with the inner and normally unknown and unconsidered side of things. All experience and all that factually we can learn about life and of our world and its kingdoms is all grist to our self-educative mill. We must start with as wide a knowledge as we can get of ourselves and our habitat. All reading of an informative nature is, therefore, within the ambit of the subject. But the deeper whys and wherefores of existence must have begun really to interest us before esoteric science becomes meaningful. Then we have to discover and study the special literature of the subject. Immediately we are in some difficulty. It is difficult to find books of genuine worth, and it's very difficult for a beginner to assess the value of the books he may come across. He could at best waste valuable time. At worst he could find books of a very undesirable character. They could not only mislead him as to facts, but lead him into really dangerous practices. The explanations and answers that esoteric science offers us will either not be noticed or possibly be of little interest to us unless we have previously done some hard thinking and have begun to ask questions to which normally there seem to be no answers. Esotericism, as we have said, has its own special literature. It is extensive and in a different idiom from that of the conventional natural sciences and from current religions. Much of the literature of the ancient religions is allegorical and uses obscure symbolism, which, without the necessary keys, is virtually impossible to understand. Some teaching is hidden in parable and myth, where again either a well-developed intuition or some reliable plain language explanatory literature is necessary before the meaning can become apparent. Some plain language literature is available now, and a bibliography is given at the end of the first and second sides of this cassette. The more elementary books on this side and the more advanced ones on the second side. There's no substitute for studying the literature for oneself. In this science, we are as much developing the faculty for insight and understanding as seeking information. And this development can only be made by effort. Making the effort to read the relatively difficult books and then thinking long and hard about what we read is the way to such development. This effort in itself constitutes an effective meditative process of inestimable value. As we have implied, esoteric science is a subject about which, in the ordinary sense, not much is known. It is an important one, however, as much for interested laymen as for those scientifically or philosophically inclined, who want answers to the more obscure problems that life presents. Further, the answers that the science offers us are not to be found anywhere else. The science is a universal one. It deals with nature in all her aspects as manifest in cosmos and on our earth, both in her kingdoms and in humankind. It postulates that there are inner aspects to nature which, for purposes of esotericism, is taken to embrace the whole of creation. These inner aspects operate in and through all nature's substances and forms. They are the powers, energies, and forces, not only demonstrated in the activities of living things and in the dynamism of natural phenomena like growth in plants and the cyclic movement of the tides, but in the characteristics of things and their modes of behavior. There are also areas of the subject that are of immediate interest and concern to all of us who may want to know, for example, what we are here for, and whether there is a grand purpose to life in which, in some way, we are involved. If there is such a purpose and we can know it, our individual lives would have a greater significance for us. We would have a long-term aim. Again, what is our relationship to our world, to nature? Is it a we and it situation, or are we all involved in a common process? Are we part of nature, such that what affects us must affect her, and vice versa? We are all surely interested in what happens to us after death. Does anything happen that we can know about? We hear much about reincarnation. Is there such a thing? If so, what reincarnates and how? If we have a soul, what sort of a thing is it? Where does it exist, both during our lifetime on earth and afterwards, after our death? Can there be such places as heaven or hell? If so, where and what are they? There is a worldwide belief and considerable interest in ghosts and psychic phenomena. in the so-called paranormal, in extrasensory perception, ESP for short, in out-of-the-body experiences, and in some communities, in magic. Whence all this concern? Are there grounds for belief in some or all of these things? Our interest in them is usually relatively spasmodic and mostly superficial. If and when we do give them our attention, can we find any significant information? Do we find any real explanations? Can we find a literature worth serious consideration, with a background of real knowledge, which isn't merely speculative? For the more seriously inquisitive of us, there are many other questions that arise from our observation of nature and our experiences in life. Whence the myriad kinds of forms and their exquisite designs, both internal and external? Whence the instinctive skills of so many creatures? Whence man's mental abilities and his aesthetic sense? What is behind man's religious teachings and activities? These and many other questions lead on into ever more abstruse areas. For example, the nature of deity, the origins of cosmos and man, the laws by which nature seems to be governed, the inner nature of man, the ultimate nature of matter, and the nature of the dynamic that keeps the whole universal process going. The deeper we go in our questioning, the more we enter the realms of esoteric science. It treats of the very fundamentals of existence in all its variety of form and function. To anyone new to this science, such a statement could sound glib and utterly unjustifiable, but it's not so. The student soon finds that we have been given enough information to stretch our powers of comprehension to their utmost limits. Although so few people nowadays are aware of such a science, there is a tradition, widely held throughout the world, of an ancient wisdom, not however known to the bulk of humanity. A few men throughout history, motivated by a consuming desire for truth, and with unflagging perseverance and immense strength of character, forced their way into the hidden places of nature and discovered her great secrets. These men have given rise to the stories of heroes in national epics. They are behind the mythical tales of great sages, saints, and magicians of countless stories. They were endowed with superhuman strength, with great wisdom, and with supernatural powers. Some of the well-known great figures of the past, particularly the founders of religions, have possessed this wisdom. For the science itself there are many names. It has been referred to as the ancient wisdom, divine wisdom, the wisdom religion, occultism, the gnosis, the secret doctrine, and latterly theosophy. It's this last name which introduces us to a mass of literature made available towards the end of the last century by Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and her initiate teachers. H.P. Blavatsky, commonly referred to as HPB, describes the secret doctrine as the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. It is important, however, to realize that this great knowledge is not a religion nor a science. Its adherents say that it is religion itself. It is science itself. It is not a cult nor a sect. It is not a specific set of beliefs. It was not invented by anyone, and is not a gospel according to anyone. The claim for the teachings contained in the massive literature of HPB and her masters is that it's based on a direct knowledge of nature herself and of her processes and laws. It is further claimed that that knowledge has been accumulated throughout countless centuries and passed from generation to generation of initiated seers. And even though the literature we now have available to us is immense, it must be emphasized that only a small part of the doctrine has been given out. We have used the word occultism as a synonym for this ancient wisdom, but it must be stressed we don't mean anything to do with the occult arts, and particularly not with the degenerate, depraved, and even bestial ones often associated with that name. Occultism, as now used, is applied merely to that which is hidden. It is claimed that this esoteric knowledge of the inner workings of cosmos underlies all the great world's religions, but that these religions in their present popular forms are relatively superficial and often much distorted representations of it. Each of them was originally given by an initiate in a form suitable to those to whom it was addressed at the time. The secret knowledge on which the religions were based was the same for them all, but it was never given out publicly, except in a minor degree through, as we have said, parables and allegories. The exoteric religions, as they are now, have passed through the hands of generations of men ignorant of the real truths behind them, and they, and particularly the scriptures, have become sadly mutilated. Further, their theologies, based on these scriptures, are therefore defective in truth. Periodically, however, great reformers come and try to bring religion back to their pristine purity. It is said that the Buddha was once a reformer. Quoting HPB, "The religion of the multitude went hand in hand with philosophy, and with her had shared the fate of being by degrees corrupted and obscured with mere human conceits, superstition, and lies. That it ought therefore to be brought back to its original purity by purging it of dross and expounding it on philosophical principles, and that the whole which Christ had in view was to reinstate and to restore to its primitive integrity the wisdom of the ancients, to reduce within bounds the universally prevailing dominion of superstition, and in part correct and in part exterminate the various errors that had found their way into the different popular religions." That's from the Key to Theosophy, Chapter 1. About the wisdom religion, she said it was ever one, and being the last word of possible human knowledge, was therefore carefully preserved, preceded by long ages the Alexandrian Theosophists, reached the modern, and will survive every other religion and philosophy. That also from the Key, Chapter 1. We don't readily realize the full significance of these ancient teachings as they relate to us individually and to our individual lives. Their relevance is that they put us into relationship with the cosmos in a meaningful way. In the light of them, we see where we, as individual human beings, fit into the grand scheme of things. We learn something of our own inner divine nature and of our innate potentialities, not previously suspected, and how to develop them. When we first become acquainted with the teachings, they may seem remote and in many aspects quite conjectural. We must remember, however, the claim that they are based on knowledge of nature herself, at all levels of being, and not just the familiar physical. In time we begin to appreciate that facets of this knowledge do bear directly on our lives. They fit our experience of whatever kind it may be. And as we become aware that this is so, we recognize the validity of the teachings. Instead of convictions born of any beliefs we may have been possessed of, we slowly become aware that the teachings have our reasonable acceptance, because we see that their principles work out in observable physical nature. We begin to see and understand as a matter of certainty that the outer reflects the inner, that the inner workings of nature which we are learning about do, in fact, reflect into what we know of ourselves and of the world we live in. We see the law of cycles illustrated in the rhythms of nature. We see this, for example, in the tides, in the alternation of our days of activity and nights of rest. In this way, an acceptance of the teachings is born, and in time we arrive at some certainties, which, however, are not necessarily, and certainly not to start with, in terms of detailed knowledge, but in terms of principles. And these relate not only to external nature, but to our own selves, to our concerns and activities. We thus acquire an unshakable background of insight and comprehension to our lives, based on the truths of existence and its true nature. We have said that esoteric science is religion, real religion, and that it relates innermost man to innermost cosmos. Quoting again, it is said that it is the one bond of unity which is so universal and all-embracing that no man has no speck, from gods and mortals down to the animals, the blade of grass and atom, can be outside of its light, and therefore any organization or body of that name, that is theosophical, must necessarily be a universal brotherhood. Further, it, that is, real religion, transmutes the apparently base metal of every ritualistic and dogmatic creed, Christianity included, into the gold of fact and truth, and truly produces a universal panacea for the ills of mankind. That's from Collected Writings, Volume 12, page 163. Concerning the development of our inner faculties, we saw that effort was the only way. It is only by the right use of what abilities we have that we acquire more. It is said that there is no more effective way than by the study of the somewhat abstruse literature of the ancient wisdom. Quoting again, its doctrines, if seriously studied, call forth, by stimulating one's reasoning powers and awakening the inner in the animal man, every hitherto dormant power for good in us, and also the perception of the true and the real as opposed to the false and the unreal, tearing off with no uncertain hand the thick veil of dead letter with which every old religious scripture was cloaked. And in so tearing off, scientific theosophy, learned in the cunning symbolism of the ages, reveals the origin of the world's faiths and sciences. It opens new vistas beyond the old horizons of crystallized and motionless and despotic faiths, and turning blind belief into a reasoned knowledge founded on mathematical laws, the only exact science, it demonstrates to him, under profounder and more philosophical aspects, the existence of that which, repelled by the grossness of its dead-letter form, he had long since abandoned as a nursery tale. It gives a clear and well-defined object, an ideal to live for, to every sincere man and woman belonging to whatever station in society and whatever culture and degree of intellect. The quotation goes on. Practical theosophy is not one science, but embraces every science in life, moral and physical. It may, in short, be justly regarded as the universal coach, a tutor of worldwide knowledge and experience, and of an erudition which not only assists and guides its pupils towards a successful examination for every scientific or moral service in earthly life, but fits them for the lives to come. If those pupils will only study the universe and its mysteries within themselves. That's from Collected Writings, Vol. 10, pages 164 and 5. A question often asked by beginners is, what justification do we have for the claim made that this science is the knowledge of the actual nature and processes of cosmos? What authority is for this statement? Well, in the proper literature of the science, no authority for anything is claimed. If, however, we can accept such statements as those which follow, they do come to have a very significant meaning for us as our studies progress and as we get used to the terms. For example, about this science, among much else, we are told that it is the uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers whose respective experiences were made to test and verify the tradition passed on orally by one early race to another of the teachings of higher and exalted beings who watched over the childhood of humanity. How did they do so? By checking and testing and verifying in every department of nature the traditions of old, by independent visions of great adepts, that is, men who have developed and perfected their physical, mental, and psychic and spiritual organizations to the utmost possible degree. No vision of one adept was accepted until it was checked and confirmed by the visions so obtained as to stand as independent evidence of other adepts and by centuries of experience. That's from The Secret Doctrine, Vol. 1, page 273. Now, these statements may appear to indicate that the teachings are in fact a form of dogmatism, but this is very far from the truth. It is explained that were it not, quoting, "for the existence of a large amount of uncertainty in the minds of students, the society, that is the Theosophical Society, would degenerate into a sect into which a narrow and stereotyped creed would take the place of the living and breathing spirit of truth and ever-growing knowledge." As we become acquainted with it, the whole subject of esotericism assumes an extent and depth beyond our imagining. What was given us was indeed very extensive, profound, and moreover, in many important respects, unique. It was said of it that the doctrine, quoting, "is barely sketched in our 2 volumes of the Secret Doctrine, and yet the mysteries unveiled therein concerning the beliefs of prehistoric peoples, cosmogony and anthropology have never been divulged until now." The statement that much was then being given out, which previously had been secret, is repeated a number of times. Further, the teachings as now presented to the world are not only unique in content, but they are also in plain language and explicit, instead of as heretofore implicit and in parables. As such, in general terms, is the nature of esoteric science, the wisdom religion. It could be, and indeed it was hoped that it would be, the basis for the future religions of mankind. But it seems that a mankind more mature than most of us are at present, willing to accept responsibility for its own long-term destiny and its own spiritual development, was envisaged. It is intended to deal with this science in its more important aspects in the 12 cassettes which follow this one. An attempt is made to present the subject matter sequentially as far as possible, but an understanding of one cassette's material will, to a large extent, depend on an understanding of the others. The titles of the cassettes, which give an idea of the scope of the subject, are as follows. 1, this one, Esoteric Science generally. 2, the constitution of man and cosmos. 3, the hierarchies of being. 4, Akasha and the astral light. 5, elements and elementals. 6, the law and reincarnation. 7, after death and rebirth. 8, origins. 9, rounds and races. 10, evolution. 11, spiritualism and psychism. 12, spiritual development. And 13, religion. As we have said, the more elementary aspects of each subject are dealt with on the first side of each cassette, and the more difficult ones on the second side. If full benefit is to be derived from these cassettes, it is essential that the student should do at least a minimum of study on his own by reading but more especially by thinking long and hard about what he reads. Further, an open-minded, non-prejudiced attitude is essential. The science cannot be made to fit any other background, preconceptions, or beliefs. Rather the other way round. They must be reconciled to it and not it to them. If our views and opinions do not fit the science, they, or our ideas so far gleaned about the science, must be re-examined frankly and fearlessly. Any student of the ancient wisdom must, above all else, be a seeker after truth. This means that the student must relate what he reads to what he knows to be fact, or what he can reasonably infer from life as it is. He must also have the necessary books available. Now, if he can't afford to buy them, they are obtainable from lending libraries. Regarding the quotations from the literature used in the cassettes, a few have been paraphrased, but the others are verbatim. References to the quotations are given so that they can be looked up, and it is hoped that the quotations are long enough to give a good idea of their content, and in some cases to give an idea of their context. The quotations made on this side of this cassette are from H.P. Blavatsky's The Key to Theosophy, from her collected writings as edited by Boris Dazurkov, and her Secret Doctrine. It is suggested, however, that although there are a few quotations from the Secret Doctrine in the collected writings on this side, there is no need for the student to possess a copy of these works at this stage. A selection of books recommended for study with the first side of the cassettes is as follows. 1. Theosophy, What's It All About? By G.A. Farthing, from the Theosophical Publishing House, TPH. 2. Theosophy for Every Man, H. Benjamin, TPH. 3. 12 Student Manuals by various authors, obtainable from Point Loma Publications. 4. The Ocean of Theosophy by W.Q. Judge, Theosophical University Press. 5. The Key to Theosophy by H.P. Blavatsky, TPH. 6. An Introduction to Esoteric Principles, a study course by Dr. Doss McDavid, TPH. 7. Foundations of Esoteric Philosophy, a booklet compiled by I.H. Hoskins, TPH. These books can be obtained from A. Blavatsky Trust, care of letters B.D., Avalon, A-V-A-L-O-N, Little Weston, W-E-S-T-O-N, Yeovil, Y-E-O-V-I-L, BA 22 7HP, England. B. The Theosophical Publishing House Limited and Quest Bookshop, 12 Berry Place, London, WC1A 2LE. C. The Theosophical Society, 50 Gloucester Place, London, W1H 3HJ. And note the address of the Theosophical University Press is P.O. Bin C, Pasadena, 15, California, USA. And of Point Loma Publications is P.O. Box 6507, San Diego, California, 92106, USA. On this side of the cassette, we are going to deal with the subject of esoteric science, still in general terms, but we are going to introduce some important aspects of it by way of key ideas. These ideas are fundamental to the whole science, and while they can be relatively succinctly stated, their ramifications are both deep and extensive, and together they form an essential background to our thinking. It is necessary, therefore, to spend considerable time on them. In one way or another, as we go through this course, the basic principles contained in these ideas will be referred to repeatedly. This repetition tends to aid in the learning process. It also tends to enrich our ideas, as each repetition will not be in quite the same terms as those that went before it. The main body of the teachings can be divided in several ways, but to facilitate their study in this course, we are going to use 5 key ideas. From these 5, we will derive a number of subsidiary ideas and see, as we go along, how they relate to each other to form an ever-growing conceptual whole. The first idea is that of unity. This is the idea of the unity of the universe as an entity. From this idea we derive some secondary ones. For example, the idea of there being one universal life, from which all that we regard as individual lives come. And further, the idea of there being one basic original substance, from which all the substances which we know of, and others which we do not yet know, eventually come. The one life and the one substance, however, are 2 aspects only of the unity. Cosmos, therefore, is essentially polar. Spirit, on the one hand, is regarded as the energy aspect, and on the other, the one substance as matter, but of course matter in various states and of many kinds. This basic duality reflects into all creation. Without substance to operate in or through, spirit would be an ineffective abstraction. The next key idea, the second, is that of there being a single universal law, representing the total process of an ordered cosmos. The one law is the aggregate of all laws operating in cosmos at all levels of being. At our physical level, this is the totality of all that we call the laws of nature. The third key idea is that of life everlasting. The cosmic process is unending, but according to a commonly observable aspect of the one law, it is cyclical in its operations, with continual comings and goings of its forms and successive periods of rest and activity. The fourth key idea is that of cosmos as a composite living being. It can be conceived of both as a series of hierarchies of lives and as a series of planes of being, such that each plane corresponds to, in fact is, composed of a hierarchy of lives. Each plane can also be thought of as a state or level of consciousness. There are therefore inner invisible planes as well as the objective physical one with which we are all familiar through our ordinary senses. The fifth key idea is that man, in his total constitution, is a sevenfold being, reflecting the hierarchical structure of cosmos in his component principles, his faculties, and the modes of consciousness potentially available to him. All his attributes derive from the hierarchies of lives which comprise cosmos and him. There are many derivatives of these key ideas. One is that, reflecting the whole, everything in cosmos is composite. It is composite both as regards its structure and its characteristic qualities, and both of these depend on the lives comprising it. In esotericism, the quality attributes of a thing or creature depend on what are referred to as the elements of its makeup. These elements comprise and impart qualities to the constituent substances, organs and bodies of living entities which, each according to its kind, give expression to the characteristics, qualities and modes of activity on the several planes and subplanes of cosmos. These elements are not to be confused with the 100 or so elements of physical science. A second of these derived ideas is that of the invisible realms of being. These realms can be thought of as forming a substructure to our physical plane and as having a direct relationship to it. They are the realms of powers, forces, energies, and even entities, constituting a potent hinterland to our ordinary world. At lower levels, these are the realms of psychism, and they constitute our inner world, itself of several levels, next to ours, which is known in esotericism as the astral light. The key ideas and the subsidiary or supporting ones derived from them are more fully described later. They are basic and ever to be borne in mind. They are all essential to an understanding of esoteric science. And in the light of them, it's possible, as we shall see, to explain much that has puzzled mankind from time immemorial. We will now enlarge on these ideas so as to give some familiarity with them. As they are the foundation of all that is to follow on these cassettes, they should be memorized. They can then form a framework into which all the ramifications and refinements of the teachings will fit. First then, the unity of the universe. This is the idea that the universe is a living whole, and that everything in it is both in and of that whole. There is literally nothing else and nothing outside, above or beyond it, in any sense. Coupled with the idea of unity in this all-embracing sense is that of the one life, pervading it, or more properly, being it, in its very essence, and that its fundamental processes of operation are common throughout the whole, throughout all cosmos. By cosmos here is meant that part of the universe with which we can be immediately concerned. For example, our solar system, or even just our planet Earth, but in its total nature. In thinking about the one life, we must never divorce the idea from that of its not only embracing, as its very self, all lives, but all the attributes and qualities that its countless myriads of component lives manifest. The world's great thinkers and philosophers have always recognized this unit of life. They have associated it with universal spirit and regarded it as ultimate divinity, often referring to it, particularly in the East, as the One Self. As we have already mentioned, the aggregate of the processes of nature, when regarded as universal being, or the collective activities of its innumerable component lives, constitute the one law. This is the way nature works. Next, all the materials of cosmos, or of our world, are derived from one source, one primeval homogeneous substance. This substance has been described as the one element, which differentiates into 6 primary elements, with itself as their synthesis constituting a 7th. The elements manifest characteristically on all the planes or levels of being. At our physical level, they are the parents, so to speak, of all the chemical elements that science knows of, and more besides. The concept of the dual nature of the universal unity, that is, of its having a life aspect and a substance aspect as essential components of everything in creation, is the basic one of polarity we previously mentioned. This polarity reflects into our physical world. The life aspect represents force or dynamism, and the substance aspect material and form, that which gives expression to the inner impulses. Another important concept which extends our idea of unity is that everything within cosmos, however small or however great, reflects in its own being, potentially or actually, the whole cosmos. This is a very difficult idea to grasp, but its importance cannot be overstressed. In more familiar terms, it is the idea of the seed, containing within itself all that the plant will eventually bring forth. The ultimate spiritual essence is in itself all potentiality. The manifest universe is part only of this all potentiality. The manifest universe means not only everything at physical level that we can be aware of, but all that is in the inner, sub or superphysical realms of being to which our ordinary senses do not normally respond. The multitude of things and beings in cosmos show forth, each in its characteristic way, something of this potentiality. The inner realms of being are subjective with respect to our objective one. The inner realms are normally invisible to us, But the teaching says we can not only know them, but operate in them by developing the proper faculties to do so. Normally, we can only know of them by observing their effects at our level of being. For example, the inner process of thought is apparent in our physical world through our speaking and writing. The second comprehensive key idea, that of universal law, is, as we have seen, that the aggregate of the activities of all the hosts of lives which comprise cosmos in their collectivity constitute the overall universal process. Nature works by way of the characteristic activities of its component lives, and as we have seen, these activities are both cyclical and progressive. The patterns of these activities have been developed and tested over eons of evolutionary time. All the diverse activities of the families of lives fit harmoniously into this pattern. By this process, the law, the universe, is self-preserving and self-regulating from within itself. The law's great cycles determine the beginnings and endings of the manifest cosmos, and the beginning and end of everything in it, from the smallest to the greatest, from the most enduring to the most ephemeral. We deal fully with the law in a later cassette, but we must here notice that cosmos manifests intelligence in its ordering, as well as the harmonious aggregate of activity of the lives. Cosmos establishes a comprehensive program of development and guides it through to achievement by stages, each in an allotted span of time. How this is operated we will see when we discuss the law in more detail. The evolutionary program could be regarded as a divine plan, and this might be thought to be a measure or a kind of predestination. But as we shall see, this does not inhibit what we normally think of as man's free will. Number 3 of our key ideas was that of life everlasting. This is another way of saying that the grand cosmic process is unending. As we have seen, one of the observable characteristics of this process is that of cycles, of alternation. We are all familiar with the idea of the rise and fall of tides, of the cyclic changes of seasons, and, in the small scale, the cycle of our own inbreathing and outbreathing. These are illustrations of what we might think of as the cosmic pulse, an infinitely complex pulse behind all the alternations in nature. All nature's operations are cyclical. Everything in manifestation comes and goes rhythmically, with, so to speak, a birth, a childhood, adolescence, maturity, then decline and death. These rhythms can also be seen as vibrations, some of incredible rapidity and some of incredible duration, like the life of a solar system. Life is like an ocean. Its waves may beat endlessly upon the shores of the earth, that the ocean from which they come persists through eternities. It is in this way that we can regard life as everlasting, as an everlasting process. This has repercussions into our views of ourselves, in our inmost being, as essentially spiritual, individual, human lives. We too, at these levels, are everlasting. The next key idea, our fourth, was that of cosmos as a structured whole, as a single living being. This idea applies to cosmos in whatever degree of magnitude we may regard it, that is, as a solar system or a galaxy. Cosmos consists of planes of being, of which it is said there are 7. The objective physical world, so familiar to us, with its invisible aspects like gases and the forces and energies that play in and through it, constitutes the lowest or grossest of these planes. Above this there are 6 others, each representing a realm of force or power with respect to the plane below it, its soul, so to speak. We learn in esoteric science that each of these planes is constituted, as already said, of living beings, and that to each plane there is a level of consciousness. Each class of lives or living beings manifests in its particular way certain of the characteristics of the nature and function of the plane which represents its world, its field of activity and experience. It is in this way that cosmos is regarded as having an hierarchical structure of lives in an ascending scale of wisdom and potency, such that at the highest levels we get the architects and governors of the process, and at the lowest level we have the elemental lives, the workmen. The point to be stressed here is that life and the living entities which give it expression must have a substantial vehicle in and through which to operate, appropriate to their level of operation. It is these substances and organisms which, in fact, constitute their particular plane of being when regarded as their theatre of activity, as, for example, our world, with all its materials and creatures, is for us. Our world consists of the substances and forms of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, with humanity as the highest in the evolutionary scale. It is important to realize that all the processes of nature, from the highest of which we can possibly conceive to the most lowly, manifest, each in its particular way, the activities of the beings of its planes. Nothing in cosmos happens or can happen without them. The scale of being is said to descend from the highest possible spiritual realms, that is, those of inmost subjectivity, down through a descending series of levels until we arrive at our objective world, with its infinity of kinds, of form, and multitudes of lives comprising them. Our fifth key idea was that of the constitution of man. We're all familiar with the idea of man having a soul. This means that he has at least 2 elements to his being, his body and his soul. But in other places we come across the idea of his also having a spirit. The occult or esoteric view of man's constitution inverts these ideas and elaborates them. It says that man is essentially a spiritual entity, having a soul and a body. His soul elements are in the inner worlds of being which, at the highest levels, give expression to spiritual qualities. At the intermediate and lower levels, they are the means of expression of his mental and psychic faculties, which demonstrate his personal characteristics and idiosyncrasies. All these inner qualities and attributes and functions are given final expression through the physical vehicle, the body. Summarizing these ideas, we see that a man can act physically in certain ways, and he can feel emotionally and think. These are his principal modes of activity, and his feeling and thinking reflect something of aspects of his inner being. Esoteric science says that in fact man is a sevenfold being constituted of seven principles, and that these seven principles correspond to the seven planes of cosmos. Again, each of them has actually or potentially, according to its evolutionary development, a corresponding state of consciousness, and its characteristic qualities being more or less developed according to the person. The science says that at this time mankind has not yet developed all his inner faculties, and that largely they constitute powers latent within him. This idea of man's multipart nature is essential to a proper understanding of many of those questions to which, as we have said, men have long sought answers. When we come to discover something of the origins of these principles in man, we will see how he comes to be, in his inmost being, a spiritual creature, and it is by reason of this that mankind's propensity for religion is ultimately explained. The supplementary ideas we derive from the five key ones help us further to understand the life processes in which we, as human beings, are involved. Among these further ideas are those which explain the cosmic creative process, whereby physical material and forms are projected from invisible ideal patterns at the higher levels to ethereal counterparts in the lower inner worlds, thence into objective being. From these ideas we get an insight into the after-death processes and those of reincarnation. These processes reflect those of the eventual dissolution of all things and their reappearance in the world of objective being in due season. Concerning origins, we have an interesting definition in the dictionary of cosmogony. It is a theory or myth of the origin of the universe, especially of the stars, nebulae, etc. And the dictionary definition of the word cosmos is the world or universe as an orderly or systematic whole, opposite to chaos, order. The esoteric science, as given us in H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, contains a description in some detail of the inner origins of cosmos and of the developmental stages by which our particular world and its creatures came into being. In thinking of such origins, however, we must never forget that the total cosmic process is continuous. This means, in effect, that there is really neither beginning nor end to the process as such. It is the things which manifest in it periodically, those that in fact constitute cosmos, which come and go. It is they, therefore, which obviously have a start and a finish to their existence. It is only in this sense that we can talk about origins. Another idea relevant to the elements is how the one element, or primordial substance, becomes the substances which in turn become the constituents of existence. In the esoteric science, it is said that the one element emanates or differentiates into 6 distinct elements. These can be regarded as states of the original homogeneous substance, each state with its own characteristic. These characteristics reflect through, from the top to the bottom, so to speak, of creation, through all the planes of existence. This means that the 7 cosmic elements constitute 7 primary aspects of existence on each plane. The characteristics of these elements at our level are symbolized in those ascribed to our astrological planets. Further, 4 of these cosmic elements reflect into our physical realm of being as the 4 elements commonly called by the old philosophers earth, water, air, and fire. In one sense, these are states of matter corresponding to solidity, fluidity, the gaseous state, and heat in its many forms. According to esotericism, there are 3 more such basic elements, but of these, only one, given the name ether, is only just beginning to manifest. The other 2 are not named and will not have being at our level for many millions of years. All our physical elements of chemistry are derived by a process of differentiation, combination, and permutation from the basic cosmic elements. Again, however, we must bear in mind, whether we are thinking of the physical or of the inner invisible realms of existence, all substance, all matter derives ultimately from the one common, homogeneous, primordial element or substance, and that their inherent energy is a manifestation of aspects of the one common energy, itself deriving from the one life, the ultimate divine dynamic or spirit. We have introduced the idea already that cosmos as a unity manifests in diversity. It manifests life by way of multitudes of lives. Life per se needs a vehicle through which to operate, and this vehicle can be regarded either as substance or as form, composed of substance. Living things, therefore, have both a life aspect and a body or form aspect. Now, esoteric science admits of nothing without these 2 aspects. Everything is regarded as dual and living. however inert it may appear. There is no such thing as dead matter. Although we may tend to regard the elements, on whatever level of being we are thinking about, as substances, they are themselves manifestations of life operating characteristically. At the lowest, even the pre-material levels of existence, it is said, there is substance, as pre-material atoms constituting what are called life atoms or elementals, the most rudimentary of beings. Even at these lowly levels there is a developmental scale of life, with the elementals at various evolutionary stages. Elementals can be regarded as living beings, the souls of the elements, whereas in one sense they are entities, in another sense they are mere natural forces or centers of such force. Arising from our key idea of evolution, apart from the process being continuous, it proceeds by stages. These are exemplified on earth in the substances, plants and creatures of the kingdoms of nature. These represent, in the very large scale, life at different stages of development which reflect into the ages of the world itself and into the races of men. Now here we have to introduce an idea that will be very strange and, to start with, difficult to comprehend. It is that our world is said to be one of 7 distinct evolutionary stages, each with a separate form. 6 of the 7 stages, that is those other than our Earth, are represented as globes intimately associated with our Earth, but they are in the subjective realms of being and are therefore invisible to us. Life waves, however, circulate from one such globe to the next. The whole series of 7 globes is referred to in the literature as a chain, and one passage of a life wave round them all is called a round. This idea will be expanded and explained in cassette 9. As far as our Earth is concerned, a day in its life is the time taken for 7 so-called root races of men to mature. The root race is a definite evolutionary stage for our humanity. All the foregoing basic and supplementary ideas provide us with the building bricks, so to speak, of an edifice of thought that will be new to many of us. The ideas can supply us with the material for our understanding of many of life's problems, which, as we have said, would otherwise be quite insoluble. They also give us an insight into the nature and workings of cosmos, and a totally new idea of what might be regarded as deity. They explain religion in terms of the ultimate, essential, spiritual nature of everything. The evolutionary development process is the slow unfoldment of spiritual faculties inherent in the one life. This process applies to each individual man and extends over many lives. It is such ideas as these that are of the greatest significance to us. They help us not only to understand the cosmic process as a whole, but our particular part in it, as totally involved units. To reiterate the content of this cassette, we have 5 key ideas. The first of unity, the second of universal law, which includes that of evolution and cycles, the third, life everlasting, the fourth, cosmos as a structured whole with its planes and hierarchies of beings, and the fifth, the constitution of man. Derived from these, we had 9 supplementary ideas. One was of the elements, another of the elementals, a third, the invisible realms of being, the fourth, the cosmic creative process, the fifth, after death states and reincarnation, sixth, origins, seventh, the dual nature of all things, eighth, evolution and aspects of law, and ninth, the evolutionary stages of development as seen in the kingdoms of nature, in rounds and races. Now, all this is by way of introduction. We have presented some possibly strange new ideas, some of which may seem hardly acceptable, but it is hoped to justify them in the explanations which follow. It must always be remembered that aspects of esoteric science cannot be properly understood in isolation. We have continually to be expanding our overall view rather than immersing ourselves in one or more particular aspect. An understanding of one aspect helps in our understanding of them all, and vice versa. The books recommended for study with the second sides of the cassettes are as follows. 1. The Key to Theosophy by H.P. Blavatsky. This book was recommended for study with the first sides of the cassettes, but its repeated study is well worthwhile. 2. An abridgment of the Secret Doctrine by Preston and Humphreys, TPH. 3. The Secret Doctrine, H.P. Blavatsky, various publishers. 4. The Divine Plan, Geoffrey A, TPH. 5. The Mahatma Letters to A.P. Sinnett, TPH. 6. The Collected Writings of H.P. Blavatsky, edited by Boris Doziakov, TPH. 7. Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky, TPH. Note, the Secret Doctrine was originally published in 2 volumes, but H.P.B. referred occasionally to a third and even a 4th volume, but neither of these was published. Some miscellaneous papers and her instructions to her esoteric school were published after her death as a 3rd volume in 1897. References to this are made in the cassettes, but they are all from her E.S. instructions. These instructions are published in Vol 12 of the Collected Writings, and in a book, The Esoteric Writings of H.P. Blavatsky, edited by L.H. Leslie Smith and published by Quest Books at 306 West Geneva Road, Wheaton, Illinois 60187, USA. the end of the second side of cassette 1